let's get started. So good evening. My name is Dr. Matthew Camp. I am Director of Government Relations at Teachers College and Community Engagement at Teachers College, Columbia University. Tonight, we are going to learn about legislation that would ensure that students in New York schools are taught about the historical contributions of Asian Americans. And I'm running TC Take Action, and we're hosting this endeavor in close partnership with students across Columbia campuses, including Teachers College. TC Take Action is TC's platform to learn about and take action on issues and that are important to our community. So we've worked on gun violence prevention legislation, student loan forgiveness. Who's interested in that? Probably. Okay, well, just about everyone. LGBT rights, voting rights, climate, and more. The TC Take Action initiative started basically 6 years ago in close partnership with students. It's student driven to respond to your needs and to leverage. Good afternoon, good evening, Senator Ralou. Thank you for joining us. We're so happy you're here. And Senator, we were just talking about TC Take Action is an initiative driven by students to respond to some pressing issues of the day. And I'll walk through the flow of the show here today and then hand it off to our student organizers because they are super organized and super impressive. I wish I was that smart and together at 20 years old or less. So we will have an overview of the bill by Ara. Ara, if you could wave to us. And thank you. So what is the bill all about? Junie and Nicole will talk about nationwide progress of similar legislation. David will walk us through an environmental scan of what other organizations are doing. And Professor Young will jump in to chat about what the bill might mean for students. Of course, we'll have Senator Liu and Assembly Member Lee have dedicated time to talk about their bill. And Senator, we understand that you're in session, so if you do need to jump in earlier, please do so. We'll have a moderated discussion with the bill sponsors, very exciting. And then the action component is writing letters to state legislators. So we have a really cool tool called Voter Voice, which allows us to share your story with legislators throughout the state, what this bill means to you. And just before that, Mariana and Veronica will have kind of like a digging deep, a personalized primer on what the bill means to you. And then lastly, we'll close up with the next step. So this is just the beginning. The student organizers will have additional workshops coming up for you, so stay tuned. So again, thank you so much for being here. I'll hand it off to Ara.
And actually, even before we hand it off to Ara, I think one thing we might want to add is if everybody could please scan this QR code if you have a digital device handy so that you might be able to get updates from our coalition, that would be great. And then the last bit of information is welcome to all of our sponsors at Columbia University. This is different Asian affinity groups on campus. And now we can get started. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So the New York State Senate Bill S6359 or A7260 would require public elementary and high schools to provide instruction in Asian American history and civic impact. The proposed curricula includes the history of Asian Americans in New York and the Northeast, which includes Asian American contribution in the civil rights movement to government, arts, humanities, and sciences, and also to the economic, social, and political developments of the U.S. As for the current status of the bill, it is in committee. Advocates are calling for $800,000 to be devoted to the statewide curriculum from a pot of $20 million that has already been approved for AAPI causes. And next, Junie and Nicole will be discussing the bill's nationwide progress.
Thank you, Ara. So as far as nationwide progress, in April of 2021, Senator Liu proposed the bill on the floor, and as Ara said, it's currently in committee. Following, in May 2021, Grace Meng proposed the Teaching Asian Pacific American History Act, which federally mandates Asian American history in K through 12 schools. And in June of 2021, Illinois historically passed the Teaching Equitable Asian American History, the first state to do so. Following that momentum, in June 2021, Connecticut passes the first state-funded Asian American history curriculum mandate. And in April of 2022, New Jersey and Rhode Island passed Asian American history mandates. Finally, in May of 2022, the Hidden Voices Project launches in New York City, which highlights the diverse stories of the AAPI experience. And now Nicole will be talking about the progression of these events in more detail.
So we wanted to kind of talk about the contrast between nationwide trends and the way that New York specifically has progressed in terms of the bill. Yeah, thank you. So as you can see, we did a little bit of a side-by-side. Junie talked to us about the different states that have mandated AAPI curriculums over the past 2 years, which are all stated to your left. So you can see overall there are 7 states, which of those include Colorado, Nevada, Oregon, and Nebraska, which have also required APIA curriculums within their schooling. And now when we're thinking in particular about New York, we see a lot of different grassroots organizations, including CACF, CPC, AAEP, URI Education Project, and the New York Historical Society, who've been working on curricular development, particularly within the inclusion of Asian American history throughout schools and the launch of many pilot projects around the city. One of the bigger pilot projects that have been launched with the New York State Department of Education is called the Hidden Voices Project, which was approved by Eric Adams last year, which is essentially going to bring Asian American history curriculums across around 1,800 schools in New York City. This program will officially go into effect in around spring of 2024. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to look a little bit more on the macro level in regards to how exactly AAPI curriculum mandates have been spreading across multiple states throughout the past years. So the states that are highlighted in dark blue have bills that have been officially passed. These are the 7 states that we were talking about before, as well as a few other states which require ethnic studies curriculums that have AAPI histories within them. An example of a state that does this is California, which passed a bill in 2021, which requires the mandate of ethnic studies bills. Including that, there are around 15 states that have recently introduced bills to require AAPI studies curriculums, and 18 states that have ethnic studies curriculums that kind of explicitly ask schools to focus on AAPI populations. Furthermore, there are around 23 states and also the District of Columbia, which have recently introduced such legislation. If you want a little bit more of a comprehensive visual look at it, you can take a look at the map here. And now I'll pass it on to talk a little bit more about movement building and political support.
Thank you, Nicole. Great. So in terms of movement building and political support, there has been a groundswell of political support both at the state Senate level, the state assembly level, as well as both through the New York City Council and the governor's office. So through the state Senate, we have multiple sponsors. We have 11 sponsors for the bill. Senator John Liu is here for us, who's the primary sponsor of the bill, as well as many other distinguished senators. In addition to that, we also have multiple assembly members who are sponsoring the bill. Initially, Assembly Member Ron Kim did a great amount of advocacy work for the bill, but now lead sponsorship has been passed on to Assembly Member Grace Lee, who is now the primary sponsor and has been conducting incredibly important work at the state capitol. However, this amount of political support isn't just relegated to the state Senate and the state assembly, but we've seen that New York City in particular, as well as the governor's office, has also issued calls to the state Senate and the state assembly to act on this incredibly important issue. Through a recent resolution, the New York City Council has pushed the New York State Legislature to push both sister bills so that we can see that both at the city level as well as the state level, there's a groundswell of support. In addition to that, Governor Kathy Hochul, as well as Mayor Eric Adams, have also voiced their firm support for this bill and have suggested that we continue mandate teaching Asian American history. This would extend the New York City program that my colleagues had mentioned earlier to a state level program, and we think that's incredibly important so that New York State is able to keep up with other states throughout the country. Outside of that, we also have movement building at the grassroots level, and community action is absolutely critical for a bill like this. So we've listed some of the community sponsors that we've been able to identify online. such as the Korean American Civic Empowerment Organization, the Rainbow Push Coalition, and the Korean American Sanctuary Church Network. In addition, there are multiple individual AAPI residents and allies across New York State that have been strongly pushing for this piece of legislation. And we also want to acknowledge that this kind of landscape analysis, this environmental scan, doesn't do complete justice to all the other organizations that have been involved. We primarily use publicly available information, but we acknowledge that there are multiple organizations that have been doing very important work in other states as well as within New York City. So we would like to thank and acknowledge all those groups as well. Separately, we see here that there have been multiple events that have been organized to rally support among the AAPI community in New York State, as well as New York City. So for example, in May 25th of 2022, there was a Stop Asian Hate with Education rally in Great Neck, New York, hosted by New York State Senator John Liu, New York State Senator Anna Kaplan, as well as Assemblywoman Gina Salidi. And in addition to that, more recently, there was an August 5th, a Bayside rally in support of the bill, headlined by Reverend Jesse Jackson to build a coalition between the Asian American and the Black communities. Again, in pushing for legislation that focuses on highlighting the experiences of minorities throughout the course of American history, it is incredibly important to build intersectional support. And that's exactly what this legislation intends to do. And we hope to not be the last one to do so. So I believe this next section should be for Professor Elizabeth Oyoung. I just wanted to double check with Mariana to see if she was at the physical location, and no worries. If not, we can move forward with our bill statements from Senator Liu. So Mariana, just wanted to quickly check in.
I don't think we have our speaker here.
She is.
Oh,
She is.
hello.
Hi,
Yeah, she just got
everybody.
here.
Wow,
Okay.
that was perfect
That's
time.
perfect
Okay.
timing.
Oh, great. And it's very much related on why I'm late to the topic today.
Yeah, for sure.
First,
I'll-
I want
oh.
to, can I begin? Is it
You
okay?
want to sit down?
Okay.
I'll just give a quick introduction,
Okay.
but this is Professor Elizabeth Oyoung, who is an ethnicity and race studies professor here at Columbia. She is an important friend and ally to our coalition, and she is also an important advocate for minority and immigrants' rights and communities within New York City. So thank you so much for joining us, Professor Oyoung, and please feel free to continue.
Okay, thank you, David. Basically, the reason why I cannot support enough what you are doing is because from my perspective, as an Asian American college professor teaching about the Constitution and civil rights, how it is so critical that it begins earlier. When I teach to elementary school kids at PS 130 in Chinatown every year, and I ask them to think of leaders, they come up with MLK, they come up with Amelia Earhart, they sometimes come up with Gandhi. But as far as Asian American leaders, void. And why is that important? Because it affects their identity. If they don't know about their own history, they are not going to be propelled to enter certain professions, to think that they could be an elected leader, to think that they could be, in the movie industry, et cetera, et cetera. So very important for our identity. And when I talk about the importance of it, I'm breaking it into the importance of our Asian American youth knowing their history. And then I'll talk about why it's important for non-Asians to know about our history at an early age. I have mentored high school students, and I mentored one South Asian student, and he needed to interview Americans for a project that he was working on. And you know what? He never even thought about his parents because he had been so indoctrinated to think of Americans as non-Asians, as white. You understand what I'm saying? Is that I said, well, hey, what about your own parents who are American citizens? and he hadn't thought about them. So he had internalized already so much of the indoctrination that goes on, outside of the classroom. And now when we talk about why non-Asians should know about our history at an early age, the reason why I'm late today is I was on a phone call with the Queens DA's office. They have an incident where a Black Latino male youth sprayed a 55-year-old Asian woman in Flushing with water and called her a chink. Now, had that youth had some understanding of history of Asian American contributions at an earlier age, could that have prevented this incident? Very much why we need to spread the word. And for me as an activist, by non-Asians and Asians not knowing about their history at an earlier age, it delays activism. It delays activism on key issues where we are trying to promote equality for everyone. And if you don't know about your history, you don't know about the discrimination, then you view things as isolated incidences rather than a pattern and a practice. And so at the college level for non-Asians, that's key, because those of you, David, in my class, it's important that we have classes like mine so that Asian Americans, Latinos, African Americans can learn about our histories and our comparisons. But you know that there are very, very, very few non-minority students in my classes. And many times they are the people we need to reach outside of minority communities who need to know their own histories. But by that time it's too late, right? Because they're in tracks, studying science, studying, engineering or others. To take my class, they have to want to sort of be majoring in ethnic studies or, pre-law in civil rights or human rights. And so we're not reaching a key sector which we need to reach. And so then what's the end result of all of this is that this notion of othering continues. And that's what has led us to so many problems today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and Professor Ouyang for giving us all of this current landscape of AAPI, history education, the current bill, and the very real and direct impact that AAPI history education and engagement has for students in our New York City schools and as close as Chinatown and Flushing. Thank you so much for that. Now we'll pass it over to Senator John Liu, who I've had the privilege of working with in high school and I know is very committed to AAPI education, and Assembly Grace Lee. Both are also very immensely involved with the Columbia community. It would be really great if each of you can just tell us a little bit about yourselves and speak to the importance of this legislation, starting with Senator John Liu and then Assemblywoman.
Thanks, Weena. I don't think you need to have our mugs up here so we can see everybody else in the Zoom. I want to thank you. Yeah, look, I want to thank all of you here, certainly Dr. Kemp, Weena Tang, who makes a habit of telling me what to do all the time. Her contributions to my office as we were dealing with the pandemic that accompanied the COVID-19 crisis. This is a really timely issue, and I want to thank all of you for being interested in this. It's great to hear Professor Ouyang talk about her experiences and the need for it, because she and I are on the same page here. The reason that I proposed this legislation to require the teaching of Asian American history and what I call the Asian American experience was really in response to this unprecedented onslaught of anti-Asian hate. I've been through my share of racism and bigotry throughout my lifetime, but I gotta say, I thought a lot of it was behind me. I never in my wildest, I should say nightmares, did I think that we would see this incredible amount of hate and bigotry directed against our community here in New York and across the country, coincident with this COVID-19 crisis. Never did I think that we would face this again. And, you know, as we kept seeing videos and social media posts and news accounts of people being spat upon, people being given, you know, ridiculous gestures, people being attacked, shoved, stabbed, shot in mass shooting incidents, you know, it was easy for people to react with more prosecution, more hate crime statutes, enhanced penalties, and all of that. I think it is necessary to hold attackers accountable. But we have to understand that, you know, apart from people who have mental health issues, as well as are in homeless situations, we need to understand that hate, I don't think people are born with hate. I think hate comes from fear and ignorance. And, you know, we've had a lot of fear because, you know, people have died. Millions of people around the world, hundreds of thousands of fellow Americans have died from COVID-19. And, you know, beyond the illness and the death, there's been economic despair, insecurity. And when people are faced with these kinds of situations, there's unfortunately this tendency to try to find somebody to blame for all of this. And as Asian Americans know, throughout our 150-year history in this country, you know, it's really easy to scapegoat Asians for disease, for recession, for anything that's bad. And it's easy to scapegoat us because there's just still so little understood about Asian Americans. I look at textbooks that are being used in our public schools in New York. Our Regent Nan Mead certainly knows this well. Always good to see you, Nan. And congratulations in your new role. Those of you who do not know Nan Mead, she was a regent, which is one of the people we entrust our entire educational system in New York to. And so she really understands a lot of these issues. It's easy to blame people who you just don't know a whole lot about. And you ask people about Asian Americans, people don't know. A couple of years ago, they did a survey of 2,000 Americans and asked a simple question: can you name an Asian American? Just name one. 42% of the people couldn't even name a single Asian American. And out of the ones that could name somebody, Jackie Chan was the #1 response. You know, I think his movies are a little bit goofy, but they're okay. But Jackie Chan is not an Asian American. He's in Hong Kong. And the second most named person was Bruce Lee. I actually like Bruce Lee movies, you know, but the guy's been dead for 30 years. Rest his soul. So, you know, it's just one example of how Americans in general just don't know a whole lot about Asian Americans. And when you think Asians are either, you know, on the one hand, the model minority, this group of, you know, rich, smart, sometimes crazy, depending on what movie you're watching, you know, the model minority myth, to, you know, on the other spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum, this perpetual foreigner, right? These people who, you know, they're not really Americans. Like, you know, I grew up here my whole life, but people still, when they ask, they like to ask me where I'm from. I say I'm from New York, or I say I'm from Flushing, and that's somehow it doesn't satisfy them when I give them that answer. Or, you know, hopefully none of you get this, but when I was growing up, people loved to compliment me on my ability to speak English, which, you know, they thought was a real compliment. which, you know, I often took offense at. But you know, that feeds into this perpetual foreigner syndrome where Asians are never really deemed to be true Americans, that we're still somehow foreigners coming not to invade, but to assimilate, using the words of my former city council member. So we need to teach people about Asian Americans and what our experience has been and how much we've contributed to the success of the United States of America, and that we're Americans like anybody else. And to, you know, blame us for this disease that claimed so many lives is just absolutely wrong. And you have a situation where even the former president of the United States fomented a great deal of this hostility against Asian Americans, probably because he didn't have any idea. He had no idea what Asian Americans are about. So the way to get at the root of racism and bigotry, certainly in the long term, is by teaching people about Asian Americans, the experience, and education, which is why I proposed a bill. Shortly after Eric Adams was elected mayor of New York City in November 2021, I spoke with him about the legislation pending in the state, that he didn't have to wait for the state to pass statewide legislation. He could go ahead with it in New York City schools. And I was heartened that last May, in anticipation of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in May, he did announce that New York City would pilot a program in the first year, and it's been very successful. Last week, he announced that the Asian American Studies component of American history taught in New York City public schools will be expanded to all schools by the coming school year, September 2023. So that's a great sign. But Assemblymember Lee and I were still pushing ahead with our statewide mandate. Now, it's not easy. You'd think that it's a slam dunk no-brainer, but it's going to take a great deal of work, because not everybody believes that it's necessary to mandate this kind of education. In fact, we passed a bill, one of my precursor bills, that talks about culturally responsive sustaining education, that recognizes the strength of our diversity in New York State. And even then, some of my colleagues in the state Senate talked about how that kind of education is somehow and sometimes divisive, and focusing too much on racial identity is not necessarily the best thing for our school kids. They actually use the term critical race theory and try to cast a negative tone over it. So that's the kind of sentiment that we're up against. But I'm heartened to see this particular discussion. You know, all of you at CU Interboard, this is a great part of the effort. We've had discussions with dozens of organizations, many of them student run and student led, to push this across the state. You know, Dr. Camp mentioned earlier on that part of this is a call to action. This is not just a Zoom where, and by the way, I'm heartened to see a lot of people with their cameras on, because the more Zooms we have nowadays, the fewer people are actually turning on the cameras and being, truly engaged. This is a call to action. And to the extent that you can write letters, don't write letters to me. You can CC me in letters, but write letters to your legislators, both your assembly member and the state senator who represents the area you happen to be living in. Not just where you live on campus or near campus, but where you're actually from in New York. And then write to other members of the Senate and members of the Assembly that you may know of, and even just choose a few random ones that you aren't familiar with. I don't think you need to write to every single one of the 150 Assembly members or 63 state senators, but just choose a few and write letters and emails to them, they do get read, and they actually get incorporated in our legislative record. So for example, if CU Interboard wants to write a collective letter signed by the leaders, we actually include that. It's called a memorandum of support. And that gets included in the legislative documents that support the legislation when it comes up for debate and consideration by the committee. I'm on the education committee. I chair the New York City Education Committee, which specifically deals with New York City, but we want to pass this on a statewide level. So your efforts, your attention, and your actions, specifically in the form of letters, that helps a lot. Individual letters as well as one collective letter from CU Interboard. I see our Assembly Member Lee is on with us, and I know she has got a great deal to add as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm no, sorry, I'm a little late to the call, but thanks so much for having me, and really excited to see all of you. I don't know if you know, but I'm also a Columbia grad. I went to Columbia undergrad, majored in econ and philosophy, was a member of KSA and Asian American Alliance, and was really involved in the Asian American community at Columbia. So really excited to see so many engaged students here with us on this, to advance really great policies for the Asian American community in all of New York. So just really excited to be here. I just took office January 1st, so I'm a little new to this still, and so really just honored to be able to sponsor this bill in the Assembly and to have a really incredible partner in the Senate, and Senator John Liu. He's one of the best. So we are really lucky to have him as an advocate for our community. And I know that, we can, with all of your help as well, that we can get this done together. Yeah, so if there are any questions, and I'll just really quickly about my district. I represent Lower Manhattan. So that includes Chinatown, the Lower East Side, and the Financial District. And my district is plurality Asian as well. And so, I think this is really important to my district and my community, as well as to me personally. So I'm just really excited to be here with all of you.
Great, thank you guys so much. And we really appreciate all of your perspectives and your critical work on this topic. Now we'll go into a quick Q&A section. Let me just share a screen that Jay and I will briefly moderate. So we'll begin with a few questions from ourselves, and then we will open it up to the floor for around 10 to 15 minutes. So if you do have a question, please feel free to raise your hand on Zoom. And I believe Jay will call on you, or you could type a question into the chat and we will kind of cue you so that we're able to get in as many questions as possible over the course of the next 10 to 15 minutes. So just to get started, Jay, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Jay. I'm a Columbia student here. I realized in the beginning we didn't introduce ourselves because we were too excited about this, but I think we'll have a chance to do that later. But I'm also the president of the Korean Students Association, so Assembly Member Grace Lee, it is nice to meet you, and an alum of KSA. I guess my first question is, this group is a very unique group, I think. It is full of advocates, it's full of students, both high schoolers and college students. It is with parents and professors and teachers, and there's a lot of us here, and a lot also that couldn't make it today but are excited and ready to kind of get going with this bill and its advocacy. I'm just more curious on a legislative front, kind of where is the bill right now in terms of the floor, what you guys perceive to be the biggest obstacles to the current bill, and how, in your opinions, we can best assist with that process.
Again, I don't think we need our mugs here, but thanks for the question. You can continue to have these discussions, as I said earlier, write letters and or emails. Emails are fine to members of the Assembly and members of the State Senate. And if Columbia CU Interboard can draft a letter to be signed by the leadership or as many of your members as possible individually, and send that to, you can send that to Grace in the Assembly and me in the State Senate, and we'll add it to the legislative record as a memorandum of support. You can even label it memorandum of support for S, whatever the number is. I don't even know what the number of the bill is because it changes. And A, whatever the number is, as you know, as a memorandum of support from CU Interboard. That's the first action. And additional actions, you can contact other organizations. I know, I believe we have people from Make Us Visible here. That's an important group that's been successful in advocating for Asian American studies legislation throughout the nation, and they're taking a particular role in helping us make this legislation visible in order to make all of us visible. I should also add in right now that, you know, people sometimes talk about developing an Asian American curriculum or mandating Asian American curriculum. And, you know, that's one way to look at it, but in further discussions with organizations like the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families, which I think they have some people on in this Zoom as well, and some other leading academics like Joyce Moy from the Asian American Research Institute of the City University of New York. We're not really talking about a separate syllabus that just focuses on the Asian American experience. Rather, you know, I think what Mayor Adams and Chancellor Banks of New York City have adopted in their curriculum, the Hidden Voices curriculum, that's actually a really good approach, because as Liz Young mentioned before, you know, part of knowing the experience and the identity is knowing who some of the leaders and the role models have been, and the pivotal figures. And in order to, you know, understand the community, you have to know who the people are who have been part of the community's milestones. And that's not always best done by having a separate syllabus. You want to integrate that into the teaching of history. When American history is taught in New York public schools, that's got to include more of what Asian Americans have contributed and how Asian Americans have been part of the civil rights movement and building coalitions and working alongside African Americans and Latinx and other communities. So that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for a separate course on Asian American experience. We want the Asian American experience completely embedded in the teaching of American history.
Well, in terms of other actions that you can take, you know, we would welcome you guys to come up to Albany, you know, take the trip up here. They they have these things called lobby days, where you know, you can schedule meetings with legislators and you know, go around and talk to them and tell them why this bill is important to you and to New York, and why they should care about the bill. So that's something that you know, we could potentially look to, you know, help you guys coordinate. I'm sure Senator Lieu and I we'd be, you know, happy to welcome you guys to Albany and show you around a bit, and have you even come onto the floor of the Assembly and the Senate. So if you guys are interested in that, you know, we can talk about an activity like that. And then certainly once the bill is reintroduced, you know, so right now since it didn't get passed in the last session, it will be reintroduced for this session to be considered, to be voted on. So, you know, once we get a bill number and that's all set up, then we'll have a chance to like really start lobbying people to get co-sponsors, and also to, you know, as it gets closer to a vote, you know, encourage people to vote. in favor of the bill. So those are things that we can do together. And yeah, I mean, I think another thing we could do is probably, we can, come if there are any like really eager social media people, like I think just getting more attention to the bill once it's introduced and, bringing people on board, thinking of like creative hashtags and doing things like that, we can try and, do things like that as well. It's all about getting the word out and, popularizing this idea.
Great, thank you guys.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
Oh, for sure. Thank you guys so much for that. Another question that we had, and another point of information that we had heard from Professor Maynai at Columbia is that part of the discussion or part of the reason why the bill hasn't moved out of committee is because of a discussion of the appropriation of funds and how difficult it is to fund or an unfunded mandate or move forward with an unfunded mandate. So we are wondering if you both had any suggestions when we're crafting these letters to our legislators in advocating to fund the initiative, and any suggestions on that note would be much appreciated.
Well, it turns out we actually did fund it. It is part of a $20 million appropriation that was approved and is ready for disbursement. So that's not the main hurdle. I will, be very honest and let all of you know what the main hurdle is. Unlike some of the other states that have passed, inclusion of Asian American studies in public school curricula, the state of New York doesn't have any comparable precedents or legislation. So, for example, my African American colleagues in the state Senate are fellow legislators. They have proposed for decades now, at least 20 years, African American studies mandates in school curriculum. Our Latinx colleagues have proposed the same. So it turns out in New York, unlike many of the other states who have just simply added AAPI to a list of other mandated curricula, there is no such thing in New York. So, we would, if we're successful, it would actually be the first ethnic/racial identity curriculum mandate in the state of New York. Nan knows a lot about this, so I mean, Nan, jump in if you want to correct me on any of these items. But that's part of the the uphill climb that we still have. Now, it is my position that, well, just because it hasn't been done before, it doesn't mean that we can't mandate it for Asian American, the study of the Asian American experience, and certainly to embed our history in American history. I think the reality is that even without the mandate, many textbooks are now much more explicitly descriptive of the civil rights era and many of those battles. Whereas you look at American history textbooks used in our public schools, it's still the same reference, a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs at most, to the building of the railroads, various exclusion acts, and the concentration camps that Japanese Americans were imprisoned in. But no reference to the attacks on Asian Americans in the aftermath of 9/11, particularly Sikhs and South Asians, the imprisonment and scapegoating of people like Dr. Wen-Ho Lee, and most recently in New York City, a police officer that was accused of spying for China. I mean, I don't know how many people have been accused of spying for China, and almost all of them unfounded. So this is part of the experience, and it's got to be taught in our schools. But the uphill battle is that there seems to have been no other ethnic or racial mandates of ethnic/racial studies in New York schools.
So just to jump in on that point, in New York, we have what we call learning standards rather than curriculum mandates. And so because of that, there are different levers of policy making once a law is passed, where the Board of Regents would step in and flesh it out. So for those who maybe are less aware of the board's function, Board of Regents is the policy-making body. They oversee and set the policies for the state education department. The board is comprised of 17 members, 13 of whom represent a region or a judicial district, and 4 of the members serve at large. Even in terms of the composition of the board, the board was founded in 1784 and did not have its first Asian American member until 2014, when Regent Judith Chin was elected to the body. So even from the standpoint of who makes decisions within the department, it has only been, within the last decade that there has been Asian American representation on that board. And more recently, Shino Tanikawa joined the board in 2022. She actually replaced me as the Manhattan Regent. Now that said, there are different spaces within the board's activities that can address these issues. So the board is not only responsible for setting the learning standards, but they also have a whole other office called the Office of Cultural Education, which oversees the state library, as well as the state archives and the state museum. And one of the reasons why I think that's interesting and important for this conversation is because they can leverage the knowledge and the documentation that's already been sort of collected within those archives to bring forth kind of a more robust offering or development of learning standards when they're sort of given the green light to do so. I think the challenge for the board is being given the green light to do so, which kind of creates a little bit of a chicken and egg challenge. The last time the social studies standards were updated was in 2014. So, I mean, it's been, it's almost a decade. It's probably time. As Senator Liu pointed out, a lot has happened in terms of race relations in the past decade. And also, I think generically with the addition of the multicultural sustaining framework, the board's diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, there's more of I would say, an openness to these conversations. The folks who support that effort in terms of updating the social studies standards, usually there's an advisory committee that's comprised of classroom teachers, subject matter experts, professors at numerous institutes of higher education. And so there is a whole process that would essentially be kicked off by the passage of some kind of legislative action. But I think in terms of the way the board is composed today, it's a good starting point.
Great. Thank you so much, Nan, for that background. It's really
Sure.
critical. Great. We'd love to move forward with the action item for today for all of our participants, made perhaps the most important part of this section. How do we translate everything that we've learned into action and speak to our legislators? So I'd like to pass it off to the letter writing section. At this point, Assemblymember Lee, Senator Liu, due to your schedules, if you do need to leave for whatever reason, please feel free to do so. But thank you again for your, great. Yeah, if both of them, we would love.
Grace, I think he's telling us to get off. I think they
Right,
want to be on their own
John,
now and do what they
John,
do.
don't get off yet. John,
It would be great if you guys could stay on, but just.
yeah,
I
John,
was
stay
just
on.
gonna say, let's go get some margaritas at the Heights.
Yeah.
Anyone want to meet me?
John and Grace, stay on. This is Liz Young. Please stay on. We got a question, okay? Stay on.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, yes, but
If
we'd love
Liz has a
to.
question, I think I want to get off right now. See you later.
Okay, but just can I answer really quick on the messaging before they get to the messaging, John and Grace, please, because yes, totally supportive of your bill, John and Grace. But my concern is because of that history of resistance from African and Latino and LGBT groups, what about, insertion into mainstream history classes about LGBT issues, especially given what's happened in Florida, right? African and Latino history integrated as well. How would you respond to that?
I mean, I wouldn't say that our colleagues are resistant to it. It's just that they've had bills far long, similar to our bills that have been around for far longer and have not made any progress, so to speak. But I often counter that you look at the history books, and a great deal more of the African American and Latinx and LGBTQ experience has been incorporated, but there's still very little inclusion of AAPI history and experience. So, I know that Nan spelled out the system of educational governance we have in New York, which actually is pretty unique in the country. The underlying principle is that for 200 years, there's been a very, solidly held belief that we don't want to politicize education. And I don't want to politicize anything either, but we got to get with the times here. And so if it takes political pressure, then so be it. And that's what all of you guys need to do. You don't let people say it's too hard or no. Don't take no for an answer. You keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's always when you're dealing with change and legislation, there's always a thousand reasons why something can't be done. All we need to do is get that one reason why it should be done. And inclusion, especially, we're talking about DEI. We want to be part of that DEI also. Asian Americans, in my opinion, were too often left out of that discussion. We've got to be in that discussion much more. And so I applaud all of you for doing this. Don't take no for an answer and keep pushing.
Great, thank you very much. Assemblymember Lee, any final comments before we move on to our letter writing section?
No, I mean, I think Senator Liu said it really well. And I would say the one silver lining from the pretty horrendous and horrific last couple of years that the Asian American community has had is that, in some ways it's woken us up. And it's, made us realize that we will never out-achieve and outwork the racism in this country if we don't speak out against it and if we don't demand change. And I think that is something that is not natural to the Asian American community, but it's something that we need to start doing more of. And it's why I'm here fighting hard and representing the community. I know that's why Senator Liu is here. And, and I think you all play a really important role in helping us to get this legislation passed. Do not for 1 minute think that no, people aren't listening to you or what you say doesn't matter. It's so important for us to be in solidarity together as a community and to demand representation, demand equity in education and in our communities across all policies at the state and city level. And it's a long time coming. So I just really am so grateful for all of you to be here today with us. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for your action. And really look forward to working with you over the course of the next couple of months to get this done.
Thank you again. And before we move on to the letter writing section, could we just get a virtual round of applause with the applause reaction for both Senator Liu, Assemblymember Lee, as well as Professor Ouyang. Thank you guys again so much.